Good evening, everyone. Our eminent panelists, as well as the viewers who have taken time from their weekend evening and have joined us. Welcome all of you to the very important discussion, web-based discussions that we are going to have, the respiratory infections in the COVID-19 era. And for that, I would be moderating the entire session. I'm Dr. Arindam Kaur, an intensivist working in Mumbai, as well as the General Secretary for ISCCM. Today we have Dr. Varsha Poddar, who is the head of Influenza Group, ICMR and NIV Pune, which is also the WHO's National Influenza Center of India. Dr. Tanu Singhal, Consultant Pediatric and Infectious Disease, KDH, Kokilaben Dhirubhai Ambani Hospital, Mumbai, as well as the advisor of ICMR on antimicrobial therapy and antimicrobial stewardship. We have Dr. Samiran Panda, scientist and head epidemiology and communicable diseases division, ICMR Delhi. We have Dr. Indranil Rai, the lab advisor division of Global Health Production, CDC India. We have Professor Dr. G.C. Khilnani, the chairman, PSRI Institute of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine, PSRI Hospital, New Delhi. We have Dr. Bhaskar Narayan, the senior consultant, Department of Microbiology, PLS Hospital, Kolkata, as well as member, Executive Council of Hospital Infection Society of India. And we have Dr. Aparna Mukherjee, scientist, epidemiology and communicable disease division, Indian Council of Medical Research, Delhi. And I invite Dr. Dev Kishore Gupta, who is the Director Medical Affairs of SCIFI, to initiate with a short presentation, and then we will go for the panel discussion. This presentation will actually start the overall essence of today's the panel discussion and set the tempo of the further discussions amongst all the panelists. Dev Kishore, please go ahead.
Thank you. Let me share this. Is it visible to everyone?
Yes, seems to be so.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, the distinguished panelists, moderator, and hundreds of participants from India and outside this country. Thank you so much for sparing your time on a Saturday evening, but I'm very confident that this is going to be a great academic feast, especially in the presence of this august panelist. So before we begin the panel discussion, I'll take you through another challenge the country is or just started facing during this COVID-19 pandemic, and we'll also try to offer solution from CEPIT. So we sincerely feel that it's worth taking an effort to revisit our old enemy, that is influenza, and sharpen our knowledge. So while our battle against COVID-19 continues, we must not forget flu, which closely mimics COVID-19, at least in the early stage of infection, that has got some specific antiviral. And this is also one of the top 10 vaccine preventable diseases. So with that, I'll begin my short presentation on Expert Express Flu RSV. So this is definitely pre-COVID situation where the influenza ranked highest in burden of illness. And this is quantifiable data in terms of incidence and mortality. Well, coming to the burden of disease, CDC estimates that from October 2018 to May 2019, there have been 37.4 to 42.9 million flu illnesses and 531K to 647K flu hospitalization, finally leading to 36,400 to 61,200 flu deaths. CDC has also acknowledged molecular methods used directly on clinical material have an important role to play in the diagnosis and surveillance of influenza viruses. The new IDSA guidelines, that this also recommends use of rapid influenza molecular assays over RIDTs, that is rapid influenza diagnostic tests for detection of flu viruses in respiratory specimens in outpatients as well as hospitalized patients. Well, there is a significant financial burden on the patients, the physician's office, emergency departments, hospital outpatients, inpatients, and this also is quite visible for RSV. And RSV is the most common cause of hospitalization for acute lower respiratory tract infection in children younger than 5 years. And definitely we must not forget that RSV is also a big cause of morbidity and mortality for elderly adult patients with, especially in the high-risk groups with other comorbidities, and is estimated to cause between 66,000 to 199,000 deaths worldwide every year. So we cannot ignore that as well, although our Indian data is a little scarce. So there is a need to test for flu and RSV. So because the rapid EIA tests are not sensitive enough, and often the confirmation doesn't happen. And influenza and RSV seasons often overlap, challenging to differentiate from each other. This is all the more important in this COVID pandemic. I mean, many a times there is overlapping symptoms with COVID itself. But there is antiviral treatment is available for influenza, but not for RSV yet. But we have to be mindful of the empirical treatment and resistance to antivirals and also antibiotics. And finally, there is high hospitalization costs. So we have some solutions, which is up to you. The CEPHIT solution is having multiple targets, having wide coverage for flu A, flu B, and RSV. Ability to choose flu and RSV with a combinatorial reporting. It's having onboard internal controls for each sample, probe check control PCC, and specimen processing control, that is SPC. The SPC verifies the sample processing is adequate. Additionally, this control detects sample associated inhibition of the real-time PCR assay, ensure that the PCR reaction conditions, that means temperature and time, are appropriate for the amplification reaction. And the PCC, that is the probe check control, it begins before the start of the PCR reaction. The expert system measures the fluorescence signal coming from the probes and monitor bead rehydration, reaction to filling, probe integrity, dye stability, and various other aspects of the amplification reaction. And the results are available in approximately 30 minutes, but for positive results, you can have the result as early as 20 minutes. It's having hands-on time less than 1 minute, just consisting of just 3 easy steps. Of course, this is scalable and flexible and having a very easy to use workflow. Qualitatively, it's having less than 1% invalid rate. The test design is having extended coverage, and also its point of care advantages because assays are stable at room temperature, and the cartridge particularly easy to be filled up correctly. So this assay has 6 targets, 27 primers, and also probes. For influenza A, we have matrix gene M, influenza A basic polymerase PB2, and influenza A acidic protein, that is PA. For influenza B, we have matrix gene again, and influenza B non-structural gene NS, and RSV A and B nucleocapsid. So these are the targets. Well, this is the multiple and novel target segments which ensure accuracy for wild type strain. That means a common flu. Well, ordinary molecular assays are fine, they perform well. They can also detect flu A positive, and like CEPHIT molecular assay that can also pick up flu A. But problem happens in case of variants. So there, this built-in redundancy comes to be very, very handy, because that's the importance of having multiple targets. So even if this is not captured by ordinary molecular assay, so this is captured by CEPHIT molecular assay, because there are multiple targets. So the impact of expert express flu RSV is on-demand detection and differentiation of flu A, flu B, and RSV. It empowers healthcare providers with infection control and patient management information. This is even more meaningful in today's time, that it improves infection control. It gives a very quick decision-making ability, bed management, your PPE decision, with having a better patient flow and quick targeted therapies. And while inside the laboratory, well, improved workflows, better throughput, and you can also have the access to the raw results for better understanding, and you can have a consolidated menu. And outside the laboratory with lab quality results, specifically, specially designed for near patient testing. So the validated samples are same, nasal swab or nasopharyngeal specimens, and it's a good test for triage of patients at the ED and outbreak screening. Test performance. Well, when compared with a comparator, which is another FDA molecular test, there is excellent positive and negative percentage difference. Impact to the clinical decision making. The flu test you choose impacts your clinical decisions, because appropriate treatment of patients depends on timely and accurate diagnosis. You can reduce the inappropriate use of antibiotics. You can choose an option of using antiviral therapy, especially this is more important. As you know, the antivirals work test within the first 48 hours. Also, this is supported by CD's IDSA. And definitely, it reduces the outpatient visits by 11% and emergency room visits by 24% and overall hospitalization by 29%. So to conclude that express detection of flu RSV can detect as early as 20 minutes. And you can do the triaging and management of the patients during outbreaks. And is faster diagnosis essential everywhere. And you can target your therapy very, very quickly and avoid empirical treatments. So I'll complete with a success story. So it took place in Royal Devon and Exeter NHS Foundation Trust in 2018. The challenge was to control the spread of influenza and improve patient flow and bed management. So we offered the solution of adoption of expert express flu RSV at the point of admission. It was implemented after a trial, and the benefit was very well evidenced. There was a reduction in the mean time to result from 5 hours to 32 minutes, allowing improved patient treatment. So thank you so much for your kind attention. Now I'll hand over to Dr. Arindam Kar to proceed for the panel discussion. Thanks.
That's a nice one, Kishore. We are very happy that we be widely different. But let's go through the panel discussion first. To all the panelists, eminent panelists, all the seniors, teachers, and as colleagues and friends, that this is an open panel discussion, though my questions would be initially directed towards a specific panel member. But feel free to put your comment, interject, or give your opinion about any question which is not also specifically directed to you. So my first question to I will start with Professor G.C. Khildani, sir, that what are the other respiratory infections you are seeing amidst the COVID-19 pandemic? We all know that the burden has come down a little, but still patients are coming with influenza-like syndromes, ILI and all others. So what are the other respiratory infections, sir, you are also seeing in this pandemic situation?
Thank you, Arindam, and thank you, the organization, for making me part of this important discussion. As a clinician, I can give you some information about the infections that we are seeing in the COVID times. For some reason, I don't know whether because of masking or whatever, the flu-like illnesses have gone down, or maybe we are missing them. We are looking at COVID. But I would restrict my comments only on the infection that we see and what I have read. And of course, everybody knows about black fungus that we see. But the people who are admitted in the hospital and or in the ICU, we are seeing lots of secondary infections. We always see secondary infections in the ICU in all the diseases. But in the COVID times, we have seen few specific infections and which have been reported also, and I will not go into the details. And one of them is fungal infections. Among the fungal infections, there have been, of course, black fungus, mucormycosis, everyone knows about it. But besides this, Candida infections, which is time-honored, we know about it. Aspergillus infections have been seen. It's not only that mucor is there, but the fungal infections are also there. But the literature that I came across of 760 autopsies conducted, the lung biopsies, only 2% autopsies all over the world out of 760 had fungal infections, out of which only one was questionable mucormycosis. So therefore, I'm not sure why in India there was a severe outbreak of mucormycosis and so many deaths, especially in Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Orissa, and so many states. I do not know. Besides this, Aspergillus infections I have seen of the brain and also of the lung, which we diagnosed by galactomannan, and I'm not talking about bacterial infections at all. And just before it started, I must share my personal experience, because I work in a smaller hospital with 200 beds only. And in short period of 1.5 months post-COVID, in the patients who were post-COVID, when they got admitted with fever, and we thought it was a dysregulated hyperimmune syndrome with high CRP. We started them on steroids, did not respond. When we investigated them, I had seen 3 cases of amoebic liver abscess confirmed by aspiration. That actually made me think that there are parasitic infections also in post-COVID. There are bacterial infection of all the bacteria, including MRSA and multi-drug resistant organisms, and also opportunistic fungal infection that we see. So this is a short experience and knowledge that I have about infection that I have seen, and I'll be willing to answer any specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think we should keep in mind that the other infections are existent pretty well, and our judgment should not be clouded by the pandemic situation.
Absolutely.
Tanu madam, quickly, would you want to share your experience on the pediatric and general age group?
So I will confine myself to the community, because as
Right,
Dr. Khilani said that in hospitals, we are seeing a lot of post-COVID secondary infections. But now for the past 1 month, we are seeing a lot of other respiratory infections apart from COVID. As the number of cases of COVID have come down, we are seeing patients who are coming with flu-like illness. And when we test them for COVID, it's negative, and they're actually testing positive for influenza and RSV. And this is in Mumbai, we are seeing this because with the onset of the monsoon, there's a flu season every time. So we are seeing influenza, we are seeing RSV, and we are seeing some patients who are needing hospitalization also because of influenza pneumonia and RSV pneumonia. So, so we have to remember that now it is becoming a little difficult to know what an infection is in a patient coming to you in the outpatient, because it can be COVID or it can be flu, it can be RSV. And while we are not testing so much for other viruses like parainfluenza, etc., I'm sure if you would do a upper respiratory multiplex PCR, which includes all the other respiratory viruses, you might see others as well.
Right, ma'am. But to our panelists, I would go to Dr. Varsha Poddar and Dr. Aparna madam also. Do you think there is a strong probability of flu season this year, considering the cyclical pattern it follows? And do you think a flu outbreak is quite due? Can just the COVID that has been quite an hyper-endemic or pandemic can subdue the flu outbreak? Are we hoping too much?
Can I come in?
Yes, ma'am. Shama.
Good evening all, and thank you organizer for giving me opportunity to share my experience. Being a National Influenza Center of India, basically we are continuously monitoring the respiratory viruses, including influenza, though there is a COVID pandemic right now. So yes, active sample collection is not there, but whatever samples are being referred to NIV Pune, we distinguish as they are ILI like symptoms or whether they are SARI cases, like hospitalized cases.
Right.
And we do take kind of a round of all respiratory viruses. We check in all these SARI cases as well as ILI cases. I will share that last year there was really a very kind of scattered detection of respiratory viruses, because every month we are checking at least, because we have to keep an eye on all these viruses, being a National Influenza Center, and influenza is a notable disease also, so we are continuously monitoring. But last year 2020 the season was not there, influenza season was not there, and as Dr. Kalnan sir has rightly pointed out, because of COVID appropriate behavior, maybe this was not seen. There was no kind of transmission up to February 2020. We could see some sort of respiratory infections, but after that we were not able to detect any respiratory.
So we can say that it's a collateral advantage that we got from the COVID appropriate behavior.
Yeah, the school closure, basically school closure was also the reason for that. Coming to the 2021 season now, definitely we are seeing a rise in influenza cases, not only in ILI cases but also in hospitalized cases. And till date, 251 cases we have detected in NIV Pune, like Pune and around sampling, whatever we are receiving, in that we have seen H3N2 is predominantly circulating, and not only in Pune, but we also get samples from viral diagnostic laboratories all over the India. And there also we are seeing a circulation of H3N2 viruses right now. H1N1 was, yes, there a very limited number of H1N1 cases were seen. That just 25 number till date I'm talking about. And type B is absolutely, we will say, no, not detected in cases. Coming to the other
Type
respiratory
B,
viruses.
ma'am. Ma'am, do you mean type B?
Yes, type B. Type B, Yamagata and Victoria, there are two lineages. We have just detected single case
Yes.
right now. But I must say that these all like as ma'am you said that influenza is also giving a severe pneumonia like illness and hospitalization is required. So yes, most of the cases are being detected from hospitalized cases and not from the IRA, because we are not doing any active surveillance right now. We are not attending any OPD right now for the sample. So all majority these
So by
cases,
default, the samples are coming from institutional patients, right?
yes,
So,
yes. And coming to the other respiratory viruses, our last 10 years surveillance activity what we are conducting, and on that basis I will say the RSV circulation is right now, maybe this year we have just detected only one case, but as madam said, we are not getting that many, like we are not testing that many samples right now, pediatric cases. But 2020 up to February, yes, we observed RSV-A in circulation. Between two RSVs, RSV-A and RSV-B, there are two genotypes in circulation worldwide.
right.
Out of that, RSV-A was detected up to February. And always RSV is in a cyclic pattern. It has a cyclic pattern. Every alternate year it comes actually. We saw last 10 years data shows that it is a alternate appearance of RSV in the community, in the things. And apart from other respiratory, as madam said that parainfluenza viruses, human metapneumoviruses, then adenoviruses, then uh, rhinoviruses are the ubiquitous virus, I will say.
Right.
We mostly observed infection with the rhinoviruses also. And that is mostly when we talk about the co-infection, the other virus is always a rhinovirus. That's
It's
our
an
approach.
coexistent. Yes.
Yeah.
Aparna madam, do you think that it can come back in a cyclical pattern according to the influenza thing can come back? And what is the epidemiological pattern of India, pattern of influenza in India? Is there any seasonal antigenic drift or shift? Yeah, Aparna madam, I think you have to unmute yourself, ma'am.
Yeah, sorry, I always.
Never mind, it happens.
Yeah, so first, thank you for including me in this panel. And as all the esteemed panelists were saying, that influenza was subdued in the last season for whatever reasons, either because of the COVID appropriate behavior, school closures, or because of competitive behavior from the coronavirus itself. So this year, as the monsoon sets in, we could expect a rise in influenza again, as in Delhi and the other parts as the monsoon sets in. This would be the influenza season. And I forgot your question actually.
Now, what is the epidemiological pattern? And do you think flu can come back according to the cyclical pattern it happens? And is there any seasonal antigenic drift and shift?
Right. So epidemiologically, like Dr. Varsha will be able to tell us more about it, as she has papers.
She has already made that point. Yeah.
That there are differences in the seasonal pattern of influenza across India. So here for us and for the other parts of India, like West, from Mumbai, Pune, etc., this is the influenza season. But if we talk about the northern parts further north, then it would be earlier. It would have been the December, January, which would have been the influenza season, which probably this year wasn't evident because of the reasons that we are discussing. So we can expect flu season to be as it is expected this year.
So this year, okay. Devkishore, you wanted to ask something, I think. Yes, ma'am.
Can I just add to it?
Yes,
that,
please. Yes,
You know,
please.
your specific question was about an outbreak, and it
Yes.
is possible because we've seen that following the following the pandemic H1N1 2009 2010, we have had many what I would say epidemics in 2013. Then we had, I think, in 2015, and I think a couple of them were related to H3N2. So, I mean, I'm a little concerned by the sudden increase in influenza activity that we are seeing. And as a pediatrician, almost we have had such a large increase in number of children coming with a flu-like illness over the past 2 weeks. It's been massive, and we are testing them for COVID, and their COVID is coming negative, and some of them who are testing for flu are coming flu positive. So at least in pediatrics, we're seeing a lot of influenza activity, and even this despite the fact that there is no schools, etc. happening. Still, we are seeing it. Yeah.
Dr. Bhaskar Narayan Chaudhary, sir, your experience?
Mhm. First, regarding the flu experience, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible. Sir.
Okay. First, thank you very much for including me in this panel, esteemed panel. So, regarding the flu, what we are seeing now, we are seeing an upsurge in the number of flu cases recently over the last 2 weeks or so, with the onset of monsoon in our part of the country as well, in Kolkata. So, mostly we are getting the seasonal flu H3N2 because we are testing flu by 3 different methods. One is open RT-PCR, which includes detects only H3N2 and H1N1. We are detecting by the upper respiratory panel of multiplex PCR, which again detects the 2 subtypes of flu. And we are also testing by the GeneXpert, that detects the other types as well. So most of the cases are coming out to be H3N2. A couple of cases we are detected as H1N1 in our setting, and 2 cases we cross-checked by open RT-PCR just to verify. Both of them were negative for H3N2 and H1N1, which were detected by GeneXpert as flu as positive. So that is a very interesting finding. That means the other types are also in circulation. So now the NCDC guidelines it was revised in 2019. They are not telling there is no use of differentiating between the different types. All are causing seasonal flu now, including H1N1 in our country. So, but the other types were not detected in the earlier GeneXpert panel that was in circulation till 2019. Then it was taken out of the market, and then the new panel came in. So these are detecting the other types of influenza also. So we need to have an RT-PCR system detecting the different types, H2N2, the other types. There are some untypable influenza A viruses also. They may be in circulation. So that is our finding.
Very quickly to Khilnani sir, before I hand it over to Devkishore, he has certain questions to ask for. Khilnani sir, will this have a clinical impact, the other types, which Dr. BNC is talking about? Khilnani sir is not there. Tanu madam, any comment on that? Will it have a clinical impact, the different types or the other types?
No, I think it is important for epidemiologic surveillance, but it is really not important for clinical management, because whatever type of flu it is, your management remains the same. So I think we need a test which is able to detect whether there is flu or not, at least in clinical practice. That is
Varsha madam, do you agree on that part? Yeah, you have been nodding.
Yes. I completely agree with Dr. Tanu madam, because clinical management will remain same, whether it is a H1 or whether it is a H3. First of all, I must clarify here, whatever influenza viruses right now in circulation, all are seasonal viruses. And when we say that untypable, influenza A untypable, then we have a question of whether there is any atypical influenza viruses are in circulation. Right. That means whether there are any other genotypes like H7, H5, those queries came basically. But usually when there is an influenza season, right, Dr. Aparna madam just now said that, like, we see in India, we have seen 3 types of peaks actually. One is in monsoon, one is in winter season period,
Right.
and one is in between. It is during October to December, which is related to the return monsoon. So different parts of country has a different seasonality, we will say, and
Right.
that's how we maybe we can say that influenza viruses throughout the year are in circulation in India because of our varied geographical
And the samples would be
distribution.
coming to you from every parts of India at different
So,
times.
and
Right.
yes, and when there is any outbreak in poultry or bird flu scenario, then
Right.
yes, there is a active surveillance is carried out by NCDC also, and that time we will collect the high risk group sampling like poultry
Right.
handlers or colors, or those who are in close contact of
Right.
that episode. So that time, yes, there is a suspect of having a unusual influenza in circulation, or maybe that is the risk of coming these novel viruses in a human population.
Right.
But
Completely.
routinely there are circulation of these seasonal viruses. Influenza A, two types: H1N1 pandemic 209, that's the strain now,
Yes.
and H3N2.
Great.
And in type B, Yamagata or Victoria lineages. There are two lineages, either or both are in circulation sometimes.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Dev Kishore, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question to Dr. Indranil Roy. So I think we have seen that IDSA and CDC are quite elaborate on the type of patient whom we should test if a patient presents with influenza-like illness. So if you can elaborate, if you from your side, if you can let us know, I mean, when we should go for testing, and especially in sometimes in post-COVID situation where the recovered patient may be reluctant to go for testing, or maybe a post-vaccinated patient. So how do you take it up, sir? I mean, what should be your recommendation for testing patients presenting with influenza-like illness?
Thank you, Dikpishore. So I believe you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. So before answering this question, I would like to make a small point regarding the discussion which was going on. Since the impact of whether flu is going to come back, what will be the impact? So just a small point that we all know that the incidence of flu went down during the COVID period, both in India and elsewhere. So that means we have a lot less data, genomic data to analyze, and that might make it difficult for people who decide the vaccine strains. How they usually look at the data of the ongoing infections, and that helps them decide what kind of vaccine strains so we are going to include in the next vaccine. So with lot less data, that process may become harder. That is one. Now, coming to your question is what kind of patients we should be testing, who to test. See, if you look at the NCDC guidelines, they have a very clear-cut guideline. They have divided the patients into different categories based on their clinical symptoms. One is the mild, which is category A, and as the NCDC says, they do not need any testing. Category B will be having some more symptoms, and even they do not need any testing. But the category C will have the complications of influenza, like pneumonia and other complications. They are the patients who will need to be tested. So that is what NCDC says. Now, when ILI comes, we suspect influenza, we might decide to go by these guidelines. And of course, with the COVID pandemic still on, we might want to go for COVID testing also. That's a separate issue. IDSA guidelines, I believe that will be discussed somewhere in the course of this discussion. They have a kind of a similar strategy. They have stratified the patients of different categories, and they also recommend testing in specific groups, like in, say, they have divided into basically outpatients and hospitalized patient. There's a little difference. While you can suspect that in NCDC guideline, the outpatients who have mild illnesses, they are not to be tested. IDSS still says that you can still test some outpatients depending on if you think that this testing might influence your clinical management, like discontinuation of or continuation of antivirals like that. So that can be done. And hospitalized patients, all of the hospitalized patients should be tested. That's it. There's a little difference, but overall it's more or less the same.
Can I add?
Do you think we are testing less? Yes.
Can I add something to this? Because category B is again subdivided into B1 and B2. Okay. So B2 cases can also be tested as per our local guidelines in West Bengal, B2 and C categories. Okay. And category B and category C patients are advised to get oseltamivir. So my question to the clinicians is that whether without testing we are giving oseltamivir, whether it's correct or not. B as per NCDC guidelines, B should not be tested. Okay. But in West Bengal, we are testing B2 and C.
I think I will go back to Tanu, madam. Do you think?
Yes. So I think, it is a little difficult to answer this question in the COVID pandemic. So I'll just tell you what used to happen before COVID is with the onset of the monsoon, you would start getting a lot of cases of flu, and in some situations, flu would contribute to 50% of the influenza-like illnesses. At that time, you had a patient who came to you with high fever, toxic look, but no lower respiratory tract involvement. You could give empirical oseltamivir because the duration of symptoms would come down and the risk of hospitalization would be reduced. And also because we must understand that the flu test is an expensive test. It costs about 4,000 to 5,000. So it is quite difficult, to kind of convince people about doing the test, especially if it's an outpatient. So at that time, if you were seeing a lot of cases of flu, then in occasional outpatients, you could give them treatment if they had very high fever or they were looking toxic, but definitely not to those people who are having low-grade fever and mild just cough and sore throat. Now, but of course, there was a risk of abuse of the antivirals, because for every 2 people whom you're prescribing oseltamivir, 1 may not be flu and there may be other respiratory viruses. But now the current situation is complicated by the fact that we don't know that in influenza-like illness presentation, what percentage is flu, what percentage is COVID, and what percentage is other respiratory viruses. So therefore, you have COVID also, which may be contributing to a fair share of these influenza-like illnesses. So that is why it becomes very difficult to practice empiric therapy in today's scenario. And what we tend to do in our clinical practice is that if a patient comes with flu-like symptoms, our first thing is to test for COVID. Because
to exclude
you have to exclude it because of the fact that it has implications for isolation, it has implications for other family members, it has to be reported to the government. And that is true. You would even test for COVID even if the patient had COVID 2-3 months earlier, because you know that with new variants you can get a reinfection. And you should also test even if it's a vaccinated patient, because you can get mild infections even after vaccination. So I think the most important message is that if you have a patient coming with flu-like illness in the current setting, the first aim should be to exclude COVID. And you do your COVID test, and after that you take a call about what you want to do. If you have a patient who has just minor symptoms, you test them with just symptomatic therapy. And if the patient has severe symptoms, you can go for your flu test. Whereas if your patient is hospitalized with a SARI, then in that case, you first test for COVID. If your COVID is negative, which is very important for triage of the patient, then you should test for influenza, because you can give specific therapy for that. So, I would end by saying that all your hospitalized patients, you should test for flu if COVID is negative. The other question would be that should you test for flu even if COVID is positive? And that is something which we may start doing, because you may have co-infections as well.
Co-infection, yeah.
And in your outpatients, you first rule out COVID.
And obviously for bad symptomatic patients, we can use oseltamivir in those B2C and others. And one question has also come.
I think in the current setting, I would not recommend empiric use of oseltamivir, because we still don't know what percentage of ILI is flu. So otherwise you'll keep on and you will contribute to oseltamivir resistance.
So even if it is a little costly, so if you have conclusively ruled in influenza as well as this B2C sort of categorization, then only use oseltamivir.
And if you have a hospitalized patient, the hospitalized patient who has come with the pneumonia and your COVID is tested negative, you send for a flu test immediately. And the advantage of this test from Cepheid, which we are talking about, is that you have a turnaround time in just 1 hour. And then you can make a decision about using oseltamivir.
And that would be quite it. So I think, can that way and why, and we have got the answer that why we have to scale up influenza testing in the COVID pandemic, that we have a lot more.
I just saw a question on the chat. There was somebody who wrote that, your RT-PCR sensitivity is only 70%. So how can you rule out COVID? So the answer is yes, you can't rule out COVID. But obviously you would, in that situation, if the patient is sick, want to test for other viruses, especially because, you have other viruses also which have entered the scene now, which was not the case a couple of months ago.
I think then the clinical consideration also comes, as well as the circumstantial evidences, right? So no other person in the family infected, you have a influenza positive and COVID comes negative. So in that cases, you have to take into consideration that it may be a really true negative. So we know that we have to now scale up, but how can we scale up, Varsha Madam, that influenza testing in this pandemic? Both Varsha Madam and Aparna Madam. How we can scale up the influenza testing and why it is required.
Yes, as Dr. Indranil has mentioned, that very important point for the WHO for flu season recommendation of vaccine component, it is very, very important that we have to have a differential diagnosis of influenza also, because we have to as a NIC, National Influenza Center, we have to submit weekly data to WHO for this activity. You as all know that there is a twice a year there is a WHO recommendation for Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere vaccine component, and for that we have to generate the data, or we have to tell that what is in circulation right now, and for that only influenza A, when we say it will not be enough. We have to have a differential diagnosis: influenza A H3N2 and influenza A H1N1. What is in circulation, in what percentage? And yes, of course, I heard that we have to isolate these viruses, we have to characterize antigenically as well as genetically, and submit this data to WHO for consideration for vaccine recommendation. That's one part. Now, how to scale up this testing? So we have already started, ICMR NIV has already started working on that, and we have come up with the combo kit right now, influenza A, B and COVID. Together we can test in a RT-PCR setting right now. It is not a point of care test at all, but real-time PCR based test can be implemented, or point of care test where we can have this combination of viruses we can detect in a same on a same sample. Basically, that's the way we have to now adopt. Basically, only COVID testing is not now kind of is a recommended.
Actually, a lot of questions were coming through that whether we can have a combination of tests together, so that in an uniform singular test we can get to know what exactly we are dealing with. Aparna Madam, your view.
Yeah, I agree with that, that with the caseload of COVID coming down, so with now whatever SARI we will see, we will have to think about the other respiratory viruses, and hopefully the testing will go up. And the combination, since now COVID would probably become endemic, so we would really need to have that in our diagnostic armamentarium.
Dev Kishore, you wanted to ask something?
No, I'll ask Dr. Varsha that. So, do you have or do you recommend any quality assurance protocol, especially for flu? We had some quality assurance programs which is pretty robust for COVID, but do you have anything you would like to suggest?
Actually, last 1.5 years, we are practicing quality assurance program. Like ICMR has made a special portal for quality control program, and all the laboratories which are being now recognized for the RT-PCR testing, even CBNAT or even the other point of care testing, there is a quality control program in place. That's obviously that is for COVID right now. And initially it was every monthly 10 samples, 5 positive and 5 negative were sent to different regional laboratories, and all the labs are mapped. It was a 3-tier system basically, and NIV Pune was the apex lab, and that's how 16 different regional laboratories under which 15 or 20, 25 labs are mapped. Those were again quality controlled by NIV Pune. For influenza, it was already exist, not on a portal format or anything, but yes, as I mentioned that we are doing this systematic surveillance for influenza last almost 5 years through viral diagnostic laboratories, VRDL laboratories, which are established by DHR. So all these laboratories are, and quarterly they are sending their positives, and a certain 5% of their positives and 5% of their negatives to NIV Pune for further quality assurance program.
Okay.
So it is already in place, and
Yes.
yes, when we are seeing the influenza season is coming up, so this activity will be again revamped actually.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think Devkishore, I got to know that Madam was talking about H1N1 and H3N2 to have an NA. But do you think in clinically, right? I will come to Indranil and maybe also Tanu Madam also, that do we need to differentiate those? Does it really impact the clinical decision or risk stratification? What is the IDSA or NCDC guidelines? Indranil and Aparna Madam. And then I will come to
Yeah. So regarding this subtyping
yes.
thing, if you look at the guidelines for flu testing published by NCDC, it talks broadly about flu testing in general in different categories of patients, which we have already talked about according to their clinical symptoms. And flu testing is generally indicated, as we have discussed by NCDC guidelines, in category C patients who have developed, and maybe in probably B2, Dr. Bhaskar Chaudhary said, so who have developed complications of influenza requiring hospitalization.
Right.
This guideline also says that empirical treatment with oseltamivir should be started without waiting for PCR results. That's what the guideline says. In the lab procedure, if you see the lab procedures of NCDC guideline, it describes a PCR, which can differentiate between H1N1 and H3N2. Now here it says something very important about the primer probe targets to be used. Now we know that many swine flu PCRs, they use 3 different primer probe sets. One is the INF-A for universal detection of type A influenza virus. The second is swine INF-A to specifically detect your swine influenza A viruses. And number 3, there's another primer probe set which is used is SWH1, which is specifically used to detect the swine H1 influenza. Now NCDC says, since the influenza A H1N1 PDM09, that is the pandemic strain now, it has become a seasonal influenza virus and well established in human samples. So the testing of samples for the swine INF-A target is not relevant anymore. Swine INF-A is for detecting all swine influenza, whether it is H1 or not. So that is no more relevant. It should not be used. But however, it doesn't say anywhere that such a test, which is able to subtype H3N2 and H1N1 is mandatory. It doesn't say that. It has been not made mandatory. However, I would like to make another point. If we move away from the realm of clinical management, it may still be relevant to subtype for, say, epidemiological purposes and research purposes. And this can only be done by institutes like, say, NCDC or National Institute of Virology, the regional referral centers for ICMR, or any other well-equipped referral labs. That is still important. Even IDSA guidelines, if you see, they have not spoken specifically about subtyping. They just give general guidelines on influenza diagnosis, not about subtyping.
Aparna madam, your view?
Yeah, I feel as my esteemed panelist was saying that yes, for epidemiological purpose, it is essential to differentiate, but for clinical purpose, the guidelines do say an empirical or self-aware for degree B and C patients. So that is what is generally followed.
I think Tonu madam will also agree that it's more of a symptoms and complications rather than the
I just
subtype.
wanted to make a comment on that thing about how can we scale up influenza testing. So I think one important point is the cost of the test. So what actually prevents, doctors from widely using influenza testing is the cost, because, COVID has become highly cost effective. I mean, the cost of the test is just 600, 700 rupees. So, and it is mandatory to do it. But influenza testing is still very expensive. So if we had a low cost influenza test, and I mean, I can't understand why it is not possible to have a cost test, because when we could reduce the cost of COVID testing so much, I'm sure we would be able to reduce the cost of influenza testing also. That would really improve diagnostics. And as Dr. Varsha said, to have a combined test where you could test for COVID and influenza would really be required at this point in time when the COVID cases are coming down and the flu cases are coming up. So I think both of those things would really help in scaling up.
So a cost optimization and an all-in-one test. Then Kishore, do you have any comment on that? Is KEFIT thinking in somewhere or other in this line?
Yeah, there is definitely there is some plan. Yeah, it will take some time, but there is definitely plan.
But it may come in the near future, right? So we can have a quick test which can differentiate between and most of the day.
Dr. Arindam, one small point.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I completely agree with Dr. Tanu Singhal. Whatever she has said regarding the cost is a very valid point, and that is one of the rate limiting steps when we go for diagnosis of patients from a clinician's point of view. I saw there's a question in the chat box regarding Legionella, and there's a question about
other atypical,
other atypical. It is always good to include all kind of respiratory viruses and respiratory pathogens. So it will be the ideal scenario. But even here, I think cost will be the main factor. Even if we developed a multiplex PCR platform, BioFire, in fact, detects a lot of 12, 13 respiratory pathogens in one go. But cost is a very important factor to decide how we go for it.
That's where I think the industry has to consider, and also the government regulations might also help. In fact, if you remember, there was always a proverb in our childhood that the books are costly. The people don't read, and the people don't read because the books are the costly, right? So if I think somewhere or other we have to come to a midpoint where the industry has to help us and we can prescribe more and more, and once more volumes are there, I think then the cost will eventually come down, and also government might come up with some sort of interventions to reduce the cost itself. So that
I think if we can do by multiplex PCR, by open RT-PCR, then that will reduce the cost, because this multiplex PCR of closed systems like BioFire, they're very costly. The reagent cost is very high. It detects now COVID also in the same panel, along with the other 13, 14 atypical bacteria, as well as the viruses, the upper respiratory viruses, the upper respiratory panel. But it's very costly. That is, prohibitive cost is preventing the clinicians from advising this test.
And also, Dr. BNC, there is also a government in a sort of regulations that you cannot charge. And once a clinician advises for a multiplex like BioFire, and then the hospital makes a bill of 20,000, right? We are always in a fix. that with the
I think
when it
like
was
COVID, the prices have been fixed by the government, by the respective state governments. So for
including the
influenza
BioFire,
and no, not for BioFire.
not for the
BioFire only
BioFire.
there
That's
is
why
one panel for BioFire which detects only COVID. For that, the price is fixed, just like GeneXpert. But for upper respiratory panel, when you include COVID, that can be charged by the hospital. So we are not using that kit yet, but some of the hospitals are using the BioFire panel, upper respiratory panel, which includes SARS-CoV-2, and they are charging the usual charge. So there is no cap on that. I think there should be some regulation on influenza testing and these upper respiratory panels as well. And there are multiplex PCR platforms available, which can be done on open RT-PCR system. They are much less costly, I think so.
But
Okay,
actually, you need a quick turnaround time.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things is that you need a quick turnaround time
Yes.
for influenza testing, because you have to take that decision about antivirals. So what would be the turnaround time in these open RT-PCR systems?
That will be
a limitation.
lengthy.
Yes, that would be a limitation of
Limitation
the
for
test.
because we will have to wait for the results and we have to treat empirically and all others. I will take
IDC
questions.
is also supporting rapid
Can I
molecular
come in?
assays.
Can I come in?
Yes, please.
The cost wise, ma'am, cost will be really very, very low, as now we have seen for the COVID pandemic. As Dr. Bhaskar is saying is correct. I agree with that, because a lot of the labs are now ready with these RT-PCR systems, and their technical staff is already well trained for real-time assays. I don't think there is there are fast turnaround time. Real-time PCRs are also now tests are available. So similarly, COVID and influenza combo kit can work within 1 hour. We can get a result. Always these point of care tests are very easy to handle. They don't require any additional biosafety like setup and everything. But yes, cost is a very important factor for.
Definitely.
That is the limiting factor for using those.
Devkishore, you were talking about some notification or a variation in the notification requirements.
In continuation with the discussion, actually, so because we have seen that our country guideline, even NCDC, says that for treatment purpose, identifying flu is good enough. Subtyping may not be essential, but whereas when you look into different state governments, H1N1 is still a notifiable disease. So how to bridge that gap?
It is actually a notifiable disease.
Yeah.
Not only for few state, it's for all.
Yeah. So, madam, so how we should bridge that gap? Because at one point of time we're encouraging that subtyping may not be essential, but at the same time, certain labs are striving to subtype just for notification purpose.
So for that, actually, ICMR has started working on those lines. Actually, as I mentioned that now we are 32 VRDL laboratories are now equipped for influenza and COVID combo assay. They are going to use in their laboratories. So at least majority state will be covered with this actually, and nearby labs can refer the sample to these referral laboratories for influenza diagnosis, and they will be equipped with the differential. Initially, it will be influenza A and COVID only, but if influenza A positive, further
then you will go for subtyping. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Aparna madam, any comment on this?
Limit the cost of the test also.
Right. You can utilize the resources properly.
Absolutely.
On that one.
Absolutely.
Aparna madam, your comment? I think she is not there. And are we? Yes, please.
Notification, I think notification, we are notifying all the influenza A cases to our local authority in West Bengal. Not only
is that a
H1N1,
mandate or you are doing it by yourself, sir?
No, mandate is the H1N1, but we are notifying all the influenza A cases because
you are not doing the subtyping for all. Yeah.
Subtyping we are doing,
yeah.
but we are
not for
all the cases.
Okay.
Yes.
Actually, that I feel that thing about guideline about notifying H1N1 came up about 10 years ago, and that needs to be revised, because
so
no
that
longer
was the question actually.
H1N1 epidemic disease. It is So they should either change it to influenza notification. It shouldn't be H1N1 notification, if at all.
Especially now as this is included as part of seasonal
Yes.
influenza.
Absolutely.
I saw a comment just now, Devkishore, sorry to interrupt, from
Yes, please.
Bharshwati. Dr. Bharshwati Bandopadhyay has put a comment that now open RT-PCR, the turnaround time has reduced to around 4 to 5 hours. In our laboratory also, within 3 hours, we are generating the report. Now with all the laboratories are equipped with automated extractors and those things. So open RT-PCR can also be viable, and it will be a less effective, less costly. Okay.
No, definitely. But you know, the batch testing will be there.
But not within 1 hour. 1
No.
hour, sorry. 1 hour we cannot do it. But there is a certain point of care of testing.
Sir, 1 hour is a machine timing. I'm
Machine timing.
45 to
And
48.
now we
Overall,
are
the
having,
logistics,
40
yeah. You have to add the logistics time, right? So
Right.
eventually that would might go up. I have one question which me and Devkishore were discussing. Right, we know about antibiotic susceptibility and all. We even talked about antifungal. It goes to Varsha Madam initially, and then everyone can take up, including Indranil and BNC sir. That what is the antiviral susceptibility in India? Do we clinicians need to worry about?
Last 10 years, when there was a quite huge, as Dr. Tanu Madam has also mentioned, when we saw a large cases of influenza, and as per category distribution, when oseltamivir is rampantly kind of in use, we saw very few cases of antiviral resistant strains in circulation, and we have not seen any cluster of resistant strain or any outbreak happened due to resistant strain. So till date, I will say resistant and all the influenza viruses are susceptible for oseltamivir. That's the good part of
In
thing.
Indranil, Bhaskar sir, your comments?
Yeah, when
globally.
actually, yeah, before this pandemic of H1N1, just before the pandemic, actually, what happened is when they tested the isolates for resistance, they found that the resistance for oseltamivir has risen markedly. It was almost 100% resistance, more than 99% resistance was there, but that was just before the pandemic. Then the pandemic came, and it was found that this pandemic strain was actually sensitive to oseltamivir, and finally this strain went on to replace the previous H1N1 strain.
Yeah.
After that, since then, all the H1N1 strains that are circulating and also H3N2, they have been found to be sensitive to oseltamivir in general, very rare resistance. So, and that is continuing, and I believe in India that will be the case, as Dr. Varsha has already said, that will be the resistance will be minimal.
So we need
I
not
just
to
want
worry
to add
on
a
a
point
clinician.
here.
I
I
guess
just want to add a point
yes,
here that you may miss influenza antiviral resistance if you don't look for it very carefully, because clinically sometimes it is very difficult to judge whether the person is resistant to it or not, because your symptoms may automatically improve, or if you deteriorate, it is attributed to other causes. So unless someone is systematically studying the genotype and the presence of mutations which confer resistance, we may be
Yes,
missing
ma'am,
it. So
but
that's
we
a
are
question to
doing
Dr. Varsha, that are they
That-
systematically looking for resistance?
Yes, ma'am. We are looking systematically, because we have both the phenotypic as well as genotypic assays are set for resistance, to look for the resistance. For H1N1, we have also set a real-time based assay which can distinguish the resistant as well as the sensitive genotype in circulation. So that was a quick answer for the things. And yes, phenotypic assay which requires propagated virus, that require the isolation of the strain, and that take a little bit time. If we get isolate, then we can do that phenotypic assay, directly drug and virus assay. But by sequencing and as well as by allelic discrimination PCR, we could check the H1N1 immediately for the resistant viruses.
Tanu Madam,
Yes,
what are your
we have to.
yes, please.
I think we have to refer these cases to NIV Pune, the resistant cases which are clinically there is no improvement after giving oseltamivir. So there we suspect resistance, and then we can refer the because it's not very easy to do antiviral susceptibility in any lab. Okay.
That is
And,
the thing. But Tanu madam, very
I
quickly.
just, was the
What could
pre-pandemic
be-
H1N1
Yes.
resistant to amantadine, if I remember correctly? But
Yes.
were they all pan-resistant to oseltamivir also?
As Dr. Indranil just now mentioned that pre-pandemic H1N1, which was that time seasonal virus, was almost 100% resistant for amantadine. It was initially also sensitive to amantadine, but over the period it got resistant for amantadine as well as resistance for oseltamivir also. So
Actually,
that
someone asked that question also, madam. Why it became resistant, and again, why the post-pandemic it became sensitive?
the
Someone asked
post-pandemic,
that
it
question.
was
It was a
post-pandemic because the composition of post-pandemic of the H1N1 PDM09 pandemic strain composition was such that it was amantadine resistant, but it was
oseltamivir
sensitive.
sensitive.
The
Right,
NE
right.
and HA gene which got composed in that H1N1 PDM09 from 3 different hosts, basically this virus as a triple reassortant virus, pandemic H1N1 09 PDM.
And in any very rare cases of oseltamivir resistance, are there any other options?
So there is a new drug which has been licensed in USA called Baloxavir, and it works in a different mechanism. So while oseltamivir is a neuraminidase inhibitor like oseltamivir, zanamivir, and peramivir, that drug acts on the viral polymerase. So it has recently got licensed in the US above people aged 12 years, and basically it's a single dose therapy, and it has been found to be non-inferior to oseltamivir, and also it clears the virus very quickly as compared to oseltamivir. So we now do have an option, at least elsewhere in the world, for treating oseltamivir resistant virus.
Yeah, but India didn't have still don't have a license for these drugs.
For Baloxavir.
Either even zanamivir also, ma'am.
Dev Kishore, you want to ask?
No, I think it's fine. So, I mean, from a clinical perspective, so may I ask Dr. Tanu Singhal that, so now, right now, we do not have much of options for antiviral. So clinically, how do you suspect antiviral resistance? Because that is one of the questions to the panelist. And if you suspect resistance, so as you said, I think we do not have much option. So what should be your advice for an antiviral stewardship? I mean, should we go for an empiric antiviral therapy, or we should restrict? So what should be your advice?
So yes, so as I said, that we should not be using antivirals, uninhibitedly, because we know that resistance had developed to amantadine, it can develop to oseltamivir. Oseltamivir resistance is known in other countries, maybe not in India, and we don't have very many options available. So we must also understand that most of the cases of influenza that we see actually don't need antivirals, because they come with very mild symptoms. They have mild runny nose, etc., mild sore throat, little bit of fever, the category A, which we are talking about. They don't need any treatment apart from symptomatic care. So that is a area which doesn't need antivirals at all. And then you have an area where you have a hospitalized SARI case. That is a patient where if you're suspecting, you should start the empirical antivirals till you get your results back. And we must also understand that the sensitivity of the PCR for flu is also not 100% in the upper respiratory tract. It is about 70 to 80%. So you may want to continue the antiviral even if your test comes negative, if you've not made another diagnosis. I think the problem is the category B. These patients who come to you who are either having a lot of fevers or who are having mild fevers but are having comorbidities like leukemia or chronic lung disease, where you are tempted to use antivirals. But I would say that for the purposes of antiviral stewardship, in these category of patients, even if they are outpatients, you should request for a flu testing before you prescribe an antiviral.
So that you can justify.
Yeah.
So that you can justify the
You
use
can
of it.
justify it, and
Yeah.
also because you know what you're dealing with. And we also look at, you know, the institutes like NIV and all to provide us information that in this current week or 1 month of ILI, what percentage were flu. Because if your percentage of flu goes very high, then you may still be justified in using empiric in some cases. But if you don't know whether what is the percentage of ILI which is due to flu, you will be overusing antivirals and contribute to antiviral resistance. So my thing would be that in category A, don't use antivirals. In category C, you are anyway testing them. But in category B also, you should advise testing before you give antivirals.
And can we include non-resolution of symptoms into the category B also? Sometimes in your clinical practice, a lot of patients do come
actually,
continuing with the fever.
Yes. So, but we must understand that, you know, if you have a patient who comes to you with very high fever, like influenza is such a sudden onset disease, they say the person was fine in the morning and then in the afternoon he got fever and shaking chills. That is the kind of symptom. He comes to you on day 2 with very high fever, flushed eyes, looking sick, looking toxic. This is a patient where you can actually ask for a flu test and quickly give him an antiviral, because that kind of patient will improve fast. And maybe in this patient, if he can afford it, you would advise it, because for him, even if he gets better 2 days earlier, he'll be able to return to work. So that is what you have to think about in such patients. And you also have a situation where you have a patient who comes to you with fever and cold and cough. Maybe it's mild, but on day 3, it becomes high. Then also you can request for a test, because you don't know what is happening. And I was quite intrigued by one study which was done in South, where they found that influenza was the commonest cause of acute undifferentiated fevers. Because we must remember that in influenza, sometimes your cold and cough and other symptoms start after the 3rd or 4th day. So when you have a patient who comes to you with fever, little bit of sore throat on day 2, day 3, you don't have a diagnosis, and you have done your CBC, MP and all, and nothing is rewarding, you can even ask for a flu test in that patient. It could be influenza for all you know.
I will come back to Dr. Bhaskar and Dr. Indranil also, that should we have also alert for the RSV in adult group? And if so, who are the high risk groups for? Who can we think of that those are the high risk people?
Bhaskar sir, you can start. Actually, in my practice, I have seen RSV more in children than in adult population. That is what I have seen in my experience, and it's detected in the upper respiratory panel. And now the flu RSV kit, we have detected, and it comes in a cyclical manner that was already discussed earlier.
Yes.
So this year, we haven't seen any RSV case so far, but earlier in 2019, we got several RSV cases, but all of them were from the pediatric population. So I haven't seen any, but there are reports that it's Indranil might be able to throw some light on it.
So regarding the high-risk groups, there will be 2 high-risk groups who will be susceptible to RSV. The first is the pediatric group, children, and other group would be the older adults. Means the extremes of the ages. They will, especially the adults who have some chronic lung disease or say heart disease. Those are the patients. They will be susceptible to RSV. Now regarding whether we should be looking out for RSV. If I give you an example of what's been happening in the United States, now compared to the previous years, if you see the RSV activity during this COVID pandemic, the RSV activity remained low. Very low number of cases were detected till March 2021. After that, what happened is, beyond March, there was a sudden spike of RSV in that country. And then CDC issued an advisory that this can happen. And in fact, they were prepared for this, because the same thing has happened in Australia also. During the summer, they had seen a sudden rise in RSV. The same thing, they were watching out for it, and it happened in US also. It can't happen here. I mean, how many times are we testing for RSV? We don't know what is happening. Unless we test, we don't know what is happening. So maybe we can think about, and CDC they said that you should be looking for, you should be testing for RSV. Along with COVID, you should be testing for RSV and other viral pathogens. So here also, I think if we don't test, we will never know what is happening. So we might think about
so your
testing,
opinion is that influenza A, B, RSV, and SARS-CoV, all those four, if put into one differentiating test, all in one test, that would be the ideal.
Yeah, because you know, in India, if you see, there are few studies which say that the incidence of RSV is not very low. It's around, say, in children, it will be around 15-16%, which is not very low. So there are other studies which have even said reported higher incidences. So it is not very low. So it might be, but again, then there's the issue of cost.
So I just want to make a point here.
Yes,
So RSV is the commonest cause of lower respiratory tract infection in children below 5 years, and its incidence is actually 4 times that of flu. So, and especially when you have a clinical syndrome like bronchiolitis in children, we always suspect RSV. The only thing is that for RSV, we also have an antigen test available,
Yes.
which is much more sensitive than the influenza antigen test. So, Mike, I would ask the laboratory experts to comment on that. What is your take on testing RSV in specific situations by the antigen test instead of a PCR? Of course, the PCR has the multiplex, has the advantage that you're testing for everything simultaneously.
Everything, yeah, and everything put together. Yes, the question comes from Tanu Madam, that whether RSV antigen testing.
So can I come in, Dr. Arindra?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
So just testing of RSV, if we consider, WHO has already taken up this actually in 16 countries. RSV pilot study WHO has conducted, and it was in 2 phases. First phase, they have included all age group sampling actually, but first phase report says that only pediatric population is at risk for RSV. Even not a geriatric 60 and above are also not showing that many positivity. So in second phase, now WHO is concentrating on only less than 2-year children who are at risk basically for the RSV. And as Dr. Tanu Madam says that, it's because of their narrow airway, and these children are progressing very fast, severe disease. And that's how now less than 2-year study or surveillance is already conducted by NIV, and this has been conducted by WHO in 16 different countries, and all are having same protocol and everything. Coming back to RSV antigen test, I personally have not used this antigen kit, but if Madam is saying that it's much more sensitive, then it's a quick answer for the.
No, it is not more sensitive than the PCR. I'm just saying that the RSV antigen is better as compared to the influenza antigen in terms of sensitivity.
All these chromatographic tests, like whether it is influenza or whether it is RSV, ma'am, their sensitivity will remain in the range of 80 to 70%. So, but still it is a good enough that at least 70%.
As a screening test, it could be quite effective. And if we have a more economic multiplex PCR, which can differentiate all the influenza, RSV, and SARS-CoV, I think that would be a more natural answer to all of us, particularly the clinicians.
I think we can expect this happening for all these
pretty soon.
Pretty soon,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
one COVID example is already set. So government is definitely.
I hope Aparna Madam is back. She was having some sort of technical difficulties. Ma'am, are you being able to hear us?
Yes,
ma'am, you are back. So coming to almost to the end of the discussion, I will come to you regarding the vaccination strategy for influenza itself, for adults. How much does those protection flu shot offers, whether it should be an annual affair for some certain high risk individuals? What is the national strategy about it?
Right. On the onset, at the outset, I would like to say that you do know that I'm a pediatrician. So
Right.
I would rather comment on the children than the adults. But yes, the national strategy right now is to focus on the elderly population, more than 65 years. And of course, when there is some chronic conditions underlying, whether it be lung chronic conditions, kidney, or heart conditions. And for the very young group, we would like below 5 years, we would like to have them vaccinated, particularly if they have some, again, underlying chronic conditions, be it asthma, chronic lung disease, bronchiectasis, or so on and so forth.
But that would be selective, not as an obviously universal. Because a lot of countries, I will come back to then Indranil. Indranil, your what is the international protocol on this, on influenza vaccination? Is it universal in many countries or is it selective, both for adults and pediatrics?
As far as I know, most of the countries, they recommend a yearly flu shot. And even for hospitals, for hospital employees, the vaccination policy of many hospitals will say that every employee should get a yearly flu shot. So Dr. Singhal can
Yes.
add
So
something.
I think the government is not recommending, like we don't have place for influenza vaccination in our national immunization program because there are a lot of competing priorities and cost is an issue. But both Indian Academy of Pediatrics as well as the adult vaccination immunization committees have recommended vaccination. And basically the people who should be vaccinated are all healthcare workers, definitely, pregnant women, all people who are above the age of 65, all people who are having any kind of comorbidity, whichever organ dysfunction they have, and all children below the age of 5, irrespective of their comorbidity status. And what is also
transplant
recommended
recipients,
is,
Madam,
yes,
transplant
so
recipients.
any immunocompromised patient
Yes.
has to get it. And basically, it has to be given annually. And for us, the Southern Hemisphere vaccine is better because our flu season starts in the month of May. So they should receive it in the month of April when the Southern Hemisphere vaccine comes, except for the states of Jammu and Kashmir and Tamil Nadu, where it should be the Northern Hemisphere vaccine. And the quadrivalent vaccine is now recommended, not the trivalent vaccine. So that is what it is, but it is not through the national program. It is on a per pay basis because people will have to pay for their flu vaccination.
Right.
And one more
And
thing,
then-
ma'am. One
Yes,
more
ma'am.
thing, ma'am. Maharashtra government is giving free of cost vaccine to the all healthcare workers, then the elderly population or with the comorbid conditions and the pregnant woman.
And I think there are certain other states also who is doing it, if I'm not wrong. But you're
Last
in a
3
better
years,
position.
Maharashtra state is already.
Maharashtra is definitely doing it and all others. So it's a state governmental prerogative to give that. So because, and now coming to the concomitant COVID vaccination, is there any interference in the immune process, or we can have a concomitant COVID vaccination along with influenza? What is our panel thinking?
So there is no data. So there is no data about concomitant vaccination. So recently the CDC ruled that you can give your COVID vaccine with all other kinds of vaccines. So because they said that there is no interference, so that is there in the USA, but there is no clarity as far as the current vaccines which are available in India, like Covishield and Covaxin is concerned. So what we are doing is we are asking people to keep a 2-week gap between the COVID vaccination and the flu vaccination. So that is
Dr.
Dr.
Bhaskar, sir?
I think we are also advising the same, a 2-week gap between the two vaccines, although there is no data, no guidelines on this. And I don't think there will be interference between COVID vaccine and influenza vaccine, even if given in the same go. Even hepatitis B vaccine can be given simultaneously with COVID vaccine. There should not be any interference. But we are still advising a 2-week gap.
Indranil,
yes. As a CDC employee, I get vaccinated every year by CDC. So they make us take vaccine every year. And even during the pandemic, they said that you are free to come and take the vaccine. And there was no instruction from Atlanta that there should be there is any interference or there should be any gap. So they, as Dr. Tanu Singhal has just said, that they are not recommending any gap or something. But obviously, I think here most of the people, they are, we are following that particular protocol.
Prudence dictates that you should not be vaccinated very quickly put together. Okay. So, so I would say, Devkishore, if you do not have any more questions, I will ask the concluding remarks from all our panelists, and then we thank all of them and close the session. Do you have any questions to ask for?
No, it's fine. I may ask Dr. Tanu Singhal that if rapid diagnostics for flu can help antibiotic stewardship also, just maybe a few thoughts.
Yes, it can help antibiotic stewardship as well, because, you know, unnecessary use of antibiotics will be avoided. So it is an important, it is an important advantage of rapid diagnostics for flu. But I would just feel that if the cost of these tests would come down, then, you know, we would be able to use them more effectively for outpatients. That is the challenge.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, madam. So I would ask to all the panelists, let us start with Aparna madam to give a concluding remark regarding today's panel. Madam, you please start with, and then we'll go to the other people.
Yeah, hi. It was a very informative discussion. That is what I would like to say. And that's it.
Thank you. Varsha, madam.
Yeah, it was really a quite brainstorming session, basically. Yes, we had a lot of discussion. To my
message
opinion,
for all the people, the viewers.
To my opinion, the future should be the combined testing, like we should test influenza and COVID together, because we have to live with the COVID also. So, but we should not forget identification of influenza. We should not miss that. Secondly, for the vaccination, maybe in future we may get this combo, again combination of influenza and SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, because again SARS-CoV is also behaving like an influenza virus. It will be a now, hopefully it will be a soon seasonal virus, and we have to have a yearly vaccination for SARS-CoV-2 also.
And one request from clinicians like us who are actually day-to-day dealing with patients and all, a more regular communications from NIV to the clinicians would be quite helpful, madam.
Yes,
a more proactive communication.
I will take it.
More proactive communication. A suo communication.
Yes, we are thinking of having a dashboard on our website so that we can post weekly, as madam said, Tanu madam also said that weekly influenza status, at least we can
maybe madam, I will get back to you. Maybe we can initiate some things, as I am representing Critical Care Society. Maybe we can have some sort of collaborative effort where we can, because we are the bearers, or we bear the entire burden of the difficult cases. So sometimes if some sort of information is coming from you, which can be disseminated to our members, that would be quite helpful. Thank you, madam, for your all the deliberations. Bhaskar sir, your take quickly.
Okay, so thank you very much for an very enriching discussion. I enjoyed the discussion thoroughly. So my point is that we should not forget the bacterial infections as well. The upper respiratory infections, definitely the viruses are the main cause. The atypical bacteria may also cause, but it's in the But when a patient presents with pneumonia, besides the viruses, you have don't forget to send a culture or some pneumonia panel for multiplex PCR. So, and in some cases of pneumonia, we have seen that the lower respiratory samples have a better yield than the upper respiratory samples. We have seen this with influenza as well as with COVID. The upper respiratory samples are coming negative, but the lower respiratory samples like BAL or endotracheal suction, they are showing a positive result. So that is another point we should.
That is true for COVID also, you said.
That is true for COVID as well as for influenza.
This one too, quite a few
and bacterial culture.
And as a culture itself. So do not neglect the bacteria in this time. And it's better to have a better to have a lower respiratory tract sample when you are
Yes.
in two minds. Indranil, please.
What I want to say is that this particular topic was very important given the fact that COVID-19 is going down right now and we are afraid that flu might hit back. So this was a very timely discussion. And before I end, I'll just want to answer one of the questions I just saw in the chat box regarding co-infections.
Yes,
somebody has asked if there are any co-infections, data on co-infections in India. I don't know if there are any national figures from NCDC or ICMR on co-infections, but I had seen one study from Jaipur Fortis Hospital. They have done a case series of around 100 patients and they have found around 9% of the cases were co-infections. And out of these 9%, only one was H1N1 and the rest all were H3N2. That's the only figure I have found. That's all. Over.
9% you would say a co-infection with COVID.
That's all. That's what the study says. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for answering the question in the chat box. And Tonu, madam, you conclude the session with your comment.
I've already spoken enough, but I think we should move towards etiologic diagnosis, from empiric management to etiologic diagnosis.
So more testing and specific diagnosis, yes, so that we can go for a targeted therapy.
Yes, because I think COVID has revolutionized it. It has shown us that molecular diagnosis of viral pathogens is possible. And I think it should move from here that, we start, apart from COVID, we start looking at the diagnosis of other viral pathogens also, because that will tell us what our epidemiology is. It will allow specific therapy and also it will prevent antibiotic misuse.
Okay. Devkishore, you thank every one of them and give your comment also. You being in a very pivotal position. Devkishore, you have to unmute.
Thank you so much. I mean, very important inputs and it's a very timely discussion, I guess so, because I believe this is flu cases are picking up and this is the right time to augment our awareness for COVID, for flu. So thanks everyone for the excellent inputs. Really, this is going to be very helpful for in case, there is some COVID, flu cases pick up in this season. So excellent.
And to all the viewers and participants, of note that kindly fill up the form of the survey form, send you in the link, and also you can download your certificate of attendance. Please kindly do that. Thank you everyone, and we would be 2 weeks after this. We'll again come back with another important and fascinating topic. And thank you all the panelists for sparing your time.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur, for excellent moderation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.